Thank you very much. I'm certainly not one of those who are uncomfortable. I'm very happy to be here, very honored to be here to make this introduction to two extraordinary people, Laura Poitras and Edward Snowden. Matter of fact, since Danielle mentioned when my first book was published, 1982, that was a year before Edward Snowden was even born. So I've been doing this a while. Matter of fact, when the Puzzle Palace first came out, the old joke going around Washington was that NSA stood for no such agency. There was even a time when I was on a TV show with Bill Bradley, the senator from New Jersey, when I was doing publicity for my book, and on the way to the studio, he said, "What's your book about?" And I said, "It's about NSA, the National Security Agency." And he said, "What's that?" So when we got on the show, I said, even Senator Bradley didn't know what NSA was, and he took a separate car back to the hotel that night. More recently, some of my deep cover contacts at NSA have told me that the new joke is that NSA now stands for not secret anymore. So, and no one is more responsible for that than Edward Snowden and Laura Poitras. I first met Laura back in 2011 when I was living in London. And we met at the Arts Club, and she told me this extraordinary story about every time she's flown in or out of the United States, some 40 times I think it was, she'd be pulled aside, she'd be interrogated, she'd be frisked, she'd often have her electronic equipment taken from her. And I thought this is extraordinary, since obviously she's not a terrorist. And the entire time she was doing this, nobody would explain to her why this was happening. And the only weapon that she ever carried was a video camera, but it was a very powerful weapon, because she was doing documentaries on what the United States was turning to after 9/11. We were a country that was going through, as been spoken here many times, torture. We were doing all kinds of things. And so she decided to do a trilogy of documentaries on that topic. Her first one, My Country, My Country, was a really compelling story about life for Iraqis under U.S. occupation, and was nominated for an Academy Award. And the second one was called The Oath. It was a very moving account of two Yemeni men caught up in America's war on terror, and it won the award at Sundance. So at that luncheon at the Arts Club in London, she told me she was turning her attention to a new topic, a third documentary, and that was going to be on surveillance, particularly focusing on NSA. So she said she was on her way to Utah. I had written about the NSA's huge data center in Utah. And that Utah data center was 1 million square feet. It really was a sort of symbol of where NSA had gone. So she was focusing her new documentary on NSA. And she was, as I said, she was on her way to Utah, and I said, you know, it's extremely difficult getting NSA sources, so don't get your hopes up. And then in January 2013, she received an anonymous message. "I am a senior member of the intelligence community," it said. "This won't be a waste of your time." It was sent by Edward Snowden and would probably be the understatement of the century. Years earlier, Ed Snowden enlisted in the Army Reserve as a Special Forces recruit. He broke both his legs in a training accident, later joined the CIA, and then became a contractor at Dell and Booz Allen for NSA. Soon, documents began crossing his computers. And to say the least, he was very troubled by what he was seeing. Very few people, having written about NSA for a long time, do anything about when they see something troubling them on a computer. Well, Ed Snowden wasn't everybody. Rather than go through the bureaucracy of the NSA, he tried as best he could to tell the story inside, what was going on, and it wasn't working very well. And what he was seeing was extraordinary. He was seeing that everyone's metadata was being picked up. Everybody who's old enough to pick up a phone, every time that phone would be picked up and turned on, there'd be a record of it, and it would be kept for years and years and years, going back at least 5 years. There were back doors being planted into the internet. FISA court orders were being disregarded or ignored. Encryption, the last resort for privacy, was undermined by covert deals and weakened by algorithms. Pleased with themselves, employees of NSA drew top-secret smiley faces on their slides. The NSA had basically become a runaway train, a runaway surveillance train. And without an emergency brake on the inside, Ed Snowden hoped to stop the train the only way he could, on the outside. And thus he passed the evidence of all these wrongdoing that was being done by the NSA to Laura Poitras and Glenn Greenwald. He knew without the documents that the agency would simply deny this is happening, say he's a disgruntled employee, and disregard what he's saying. And most of the press would probably pick up on that. But he saw what happened to Bill Penny, Kirk Whitby, Tom Drake when they tried to tell what was going on. And they tried to tell it verbally. They tried to tell what was going on verbally. And again, the NSA would come after them and say, that's not true. General Alexander would say, this is nonsense. We're completely obeying the law. And so the only solution is to actually show the documents. And that's what Ed did. He came out with the documents. And so there was no question about what NSA was doing, no question what NSA is up to. Basically, what Ed did was show us all what the government has been doing to us behind our backs for all these years. And that is a tremendous, I think it's just a tremendous advantage that the American public now knows, finally, that their calls, every time they pick up a phone, is being picked up, that their digital interactions on internet is being monitored by NSA. And that is extremely dangerous when you're getting into monitoring people's interactions on the internet. If you're just monitoring their phone calls, there's communication between two people. When you're monitoring their interaction on the internet with Google searches and so forth, you're basically getting into people's thoughts. Because people sit before their computer and they're exchanging ideas that they might not exchange with another person on Earth. So finding out what the government was doing on this is extremely important. Just to conclude here, I was in Rio visiting Glenn Greenwald. He showed me one of the documents that was probably the most shocking one I've seen. What it was a document that came basically from the director of NSA. His name was at the top of it. And it said that, look, basically we can get into people's accounts. We could find out when they're getting onto porn sites and so forth. We could start using these vulnerabilities against people. And he wasn't talking about terrorists. He wasn't talking about criminals. He was talking about radicals. And he was including American citizens in there. I saw the list. I mean, when the document came out, the actual names were redacted, but there are American names in there. And what it harkened back to was what we were discussing here earlier, what Fritz was talking about, this whole idea of J. Edgar Hoover, using the vulnerabilities of radical of that time, Martin Luther King, to discredit him in front of his followers. I mean, if they couldn't arrest him for something, they could at least discredit him. And so the circle was coming almost full back at that point. And I realized that when I saw that document. So I'm very grateful that we were able to find out what was happening at this time. Because as someone who has watched that train heading to that abyss, and that's what Frank Church called it, an abyss, for a very long time, I'm very grateful to Ed Snowden and Laura Poitras for bringing this all to our attention. So I'm very happy to introduce them to you for a discussion. Hopefully the electronics will work here.